because my mom said when I was a little baby, she would wrap me up. I was born in Chicago, and she would wrap me up in a blanket. She would take me to church and lay me down in the back, and I would sleep in the back, and then she'd pick me up and take me back home. Well, I continued to sleep for about 21 years in church, and so as I began, church was part of our life. Whenever the doors were open, we were there. And at that time, we used to, Sunday morning, we had Sunday school, what they called Sunday school. Then we had the church service. Then we had the nighttime service, usually the young people service, and then we'd have a night service, a Bible study. And then Wednesday night we'd always have, and then during the week if there was any potlucks or anything, we were always there. And so going to church is part of our life. Well, as I began to get older, especially when I got into junior high, I had gone to parochial school up until 6th grade, and then I was going into junior high. Well, I was so afraid of not being accepted by other kids for being a Christian that I went to the opposite extreme so that I didn't have to say that I was a Christian, And so as I got into junior high school, mainly because of fear, I wanted to be accepted by other kids, and I had this terrible inferiority complex, and I remember, my mom saying, "Now be a good boy." I don't know if you ever heard that. Be a good girl. Be a good girl today. Be a good boy. And I'd go, "Yeah, I'm really going to be a good boy today," and I'd grit my teeth, and I'd say, "I'm going to be a good boy," go out the door, and I'd walk down the street, and some kid would say something to me, and I'd grab my bat and chase him down the street, and I found that I couldn't be a good boy, and I thought if Christianity depended upon me being good, I could never do it. And so as I got into high school, I basically gave up. I saw some of the things that happen, in churches, the hypocrisy that's there, and there's no perfect church. I realize that, but a lot of the things that Christians do are very hurtful. And I remember because my dad was such a leader in the church that the pastor left, and we were getting a new pastor into the church, and because my dad had been there so long, he was kind of looked to by the congregation as the leader. They would go to him, and instead of going to the new pastor. Well, the new pastor became jealous, and finally he asked us to leave the church. And so it didn't affect my folks as much as it affected me. My folks just changed churches, went to a different church, didn't matter. Well, this was just when I was in high school, and so they wanted me to go with them to church, and because I was part of the family, I went just to appease them to go to church. And I would only go to the morning service, usually the morning service. Didn't get involved too much with the young people. I just kind of stayed away from it. And because I saw the hypocrisy there, I saw the hypocrisy in the youth group. I remember my mom telling me, "Why can't you be like this kid who was the president of the youth group?" And I remember going out with him at night, one night after service, and we were driving down the street, and him and his buddy, I was in the back seat, and he pulled out a bottle of Thunderbird. And I thought, man, my friends are bad, but they don't try to be good. They're not. They don't have this hypocrisy that they're good. They're just bad guys, and we don't. They don't pretend to be good. And so anyway, that really bothered me, and especially when my mom would say, "Why can't you be like that kid?" And I thought, if she knew what this kid was really like, she would really be disappointed. And so I was focusing on people, and when you look at people, we all have problems, right? And I was looking at the wrong thing. I was looking at the people and the way they acted, and I should have been looking at the Lord rather than looking at people. Well, because of that, and because there's many things I hadn't done, like I'd never been to a dance before. I'd never been to a movie even show. And as I began to get into high school, I found that going to these things, it wasn't that we weren't allowed, it just wasn't part of our lifestyle. And as I would go to these things, I found that there was this real sense of guilt. And so I would try to drown it in alcohol. And so I began using alcohol more and more. And my 11th and 12th year were really bad. I would, one of my friends would pick me up from school. I had a fifth of whiskey in the back seat, and that was my breakfast. And I would be bombed all day at school, and by my senior year, I was drinking so much that I was starting to have blackouts where I would lose days at a time. And I found that by drinking, I felt like I could talk to girls more. I didn't have this inferior. They felt sorry for me because I was drunk. They would try to protect me and watch over me. The motherly instinct. And so anyway, I drank more and more. Well, this was in the early 60s, and drugs were just becoming popular then. And so I began to experiment with drugs, and actually when we would get stopped by the cops, it was easier because they couldn't smell alcohol in our breath, and they didn't know that much about drugs. And so I began to use drugs more and more. And when I got out of high school, I started working in my brother, who was 5 years older than me. And he was kind of like my role model. I looked to him more than I looked to my dad. My dad was always busy, either working or at church, involved in ministry. And my brother was really kind of the guy who mentored me. Well, he also turned against the church. He was an alcoholic, and we would drink together and party together. And as I got into out of high school, began to work, got into drafting. I was a draftsman, electrical draftsman, because my brother was in the electrical business, and so he got me into it. And I began to work, and back then there was huge contracts, and most of the jobs were, I would work on contract basis, and we would work many hours. I remember working 90 hours a week, going to school at night. And so anyway, and I grew up in South Los Angeles. And so when I was 19, my folks moved out to Orange County because my dad got a new job out there. And so we moved out there, and I moved out with them. And I would still go back and forth to LA to party with my friends. And so this one day, my mom comes home they were invited to a Bible study at Deanna's folks' home. they had a Bible study at their home. And they went over there and they met Deanna. And they said, my mom came home and said, we met the most beautiful girl in the world. You have to meet her. She's this blonde, and she goes to Biola, and she teaches Sunday school. And I thought, nah, this isn't my kind of girl, you know. I said, that's nice, you know. But and this Bible study was on Tuesday night. And I went to school on Tuesday night. And I said, well, you know, I can't go because I go to school on Tuesday nights. And so anyway, I didn't think any more about it. About 2 weeks later, her folks come over to the house and they meet me. And I hadn't met Deanna yet. And anyway, they met me and they had just moved out, and they told me about their daughter, that she had just moved out and didn't know any friends or anything. And they said, you should come over and meet our daughter, you know. And they didn't know anything about me, you know. I don't know what they knew about me. And anyway, I said, well, you know, I go to school Tuesday night. I can't come to your Bible study. And they said, well, what time do you go? And I said, 7 o'clock. And I made the mistake of telling her dad that I went at 7. He said, oh, well, the Bible study starts at 6. He says, you can come over and meet our daughter and then go to school, you know. So I said, oh, okay, I'll come over and meet your daughter, you know. And so I went over that next Tuesday night and met Deanna there. And sure enough, she was the most beautiful girl in the world. And so I got up to leave to go to school, and she got up with me and came to the door, and we talked a little bit, and I asked her out. And because they were new in Orange County also, they were looking for a church, and they were going to different churches, visiting around. And so I would come over Sunday morning, pick her up, and we would go to these different churches. And what was so hypocrisy at the finest was I would be out partying all weekend, and I would come back, pick her up Sunday morning, and many times I hadn't slept all Saturday night, and I'd come pick her up and then take her to church, and I'd smell. I must have, well, you know, I
thought it was a weird shape. I was really ignorant.
She was so naive. It was amazing. It's a good thing that she was. But anyway, and half the times I was still loaded from the night before, you know. And I pick her up, take her to church. And so we were going to these different churches, and we finally found this one church, Evangelical Free Church in Orange there. And they had a real neat youth group. And this guy that was leading it, he was in college, and he was a young guy, but totally opposite from me. I mean, he was like Mr. Studious. He had these dark rimmed glasses, but the thing that drew me to him was that he was really honest with his relationship with the Lord, you know. And I was drawn to that because of his honesty and just his love for the Lord. And so we became friends, and we were attending this church. And anyway, one night I went down to party down in LA one weekend, and we were trying some new drugs. And we got a hold of some marijuana that had been dipped in acid. And I had a bad trip, and I thought I had one of these out-of-the-body experiences. And I tried, it scared me so much that I tried to come out of it. I thought, well, if I eat, I'll come out of it, and that didn't help. And then I thought, well, I'll go to sleep, and that'll help. And I went to sleep. When I woke up, it was like I had this cloud in my head, and I couldn't think clear. And if any of you know, you don't realize how good it is just to be able to think clearly until you lose it.